Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to part two of my conversation with Abdullah and Kris. We are discussing future directions for Islam for Europeans. Abdullah, you had a question for both of us?
Yes. It's a bit of I'd say a really half-baked theory of mine, which, it might seem like a tiny bit of a stretch, but I feel like it relates to a lot of what you've mentioned on the first segment, which is what you've mentioned. Actually, no, I think we talked about this actually before we started recording, which is the whole, a lot of the zealots and, the sort of extreme groups that pop up among, both, obviously converts and those who are born Muslims, but, as you mentioned, they more often pop up among converts to Islam. But as we discussed in the first segment, how a lot of these ideologies that relates to how you categorize, say, white converts to Islam and how it leads to these insane expectations of them. I want to ask you too: do you feel like there's a relation between this say glorification and sort of like treating white converts as if you're supposed to be this special rise above the expectations of your evil race mindset, and the fact that a lot of these white converts they might end up being so overwhelmed with this sort of white guilt, as it's talked about in the political world, that this actually leads to them joining or forming these groups of zealots and extremists. Do you feel like there's a relation between the two, or is that a bit of a stretch?
I've never seen them, take this kind of offshoot approach where they, where they create their own groups, and that from there, they get new recruits to have like more of an extreme ideology. Usually, they just assimilate into an existent
Yeah, I was
Muslim
just speaking
community.
very generally, like for example, there was the whole I think there was an article, I think, from some mainstream outlet talking about the phenomenon of gingers joining ISIS or something. So
Yeah.
which ridiculous like thing to read about, but yeah, I think it's like it became like this big mainstream phenomenon where it's like when ISIS was like really prominent in 2014, where like a lot of them are noticing that there's a lot of these white converts who are joining these extremist groups.
I think the current zeitgeist is sort of siphoning off any sane person to not only accept the religion of Islam, but actually join a totally different community and culture, leaving behind their entire friends and family, which is an insane amount of things to ask, the convert to Islam. And you're right, Abdullah. Like it is a glorification and huge expectations on these white converts. The ones that are like that, those are the only ones that you see, and those are the only ones that actually make any kind of media story because it's over
Yeah.
sensationalized, right? So I mean, it's not that white people aren't converting to Islam or interested in Islam. There are definitely many Westerners who are, and they would convert to Islam if given the chance. But it's just that the current narrative is that it's all or nothing. You have to dive right in, and that's why you only see, like you said, the ginger that ends up joining ISIS. But they never sort of form their own opinions or have like minds of their own. They just sort of
Yeah.
join an existent extreme Muslim group
Yeah, so
in the
basically they were
context of
always
Islam.
NPCs.
Yeah, exactly. Kris, do you have anything to add to that?
I'm not entirely sure if this answers your question, Abdullah, but I do think that the demographic or the pool that the white Muslims are coming from is often leftist, multicultural, urban. So from dense city centers where there's lots of different people, many of them probably have peers from other groups. I think it's kind of an organic process that happens where coming in, they already have this idea of kind of a white guilt, or I'm one of the good white people. And
Mhm.
then the Muslims around them, I guess, pick up on this, and that confirms their vision for the convert. And it kind of organically leads to them being elevated as spokespeople for the Western converts. I think that's kind of how it plays out.
Yeah. Also, I like this sort of ties into something else I was thinking about, because something that I wrote about quite a lot about. I want to say a year and a half ago, was the issue of Muslim representation in, say, media. Because and then and an offshoot from that was me thinking, how are white people who convert to Islam represented in media? I mean, I remember there's this really wild movie that came out. It had Samuel L. Jackson and Carrie Ann Moss in it. You guys remember it? The one it was basically the premise of the movie was that there were three nukes around America, and the whole criminal that they were like interrogating was a white guy who basically just freaked and converted to Islam, and became a terrorist. And that was like the first thing that popped up in my mind. And then I realized, what, there like this something, not only was this something that came up like a very long time ago, this idea that white people are more prone to this sort of activity, but also there's also well, let's see, oh yeah, that show Rami, which is they had if you guys ever heard of it. Basically it's a Hulu show which got extremely popular with Arab American communities, which is well, mostly among Gen Z, which portrays, a lot of, Muslim American life in a very frank and, sometimes obscene ways. And there was a particular episode about how the main character, who's, not so good of a Muslim himself, encounters a really mentally unstable white veteran who who's really lost in life. He doesn't know what he's going to do. And Rami, the main character, he's on this journey of becoming a better Muslim himself. So he thinks, I'm just going to introduce this guy to Islam. So this guy is already extremely mentally unstable. And you get like the obvious conclusion that by the end of the episode, the white guy ends up beating up another racist white dude outside of the mosque. So like you see what like they were trying to do here. It's like this whole like this white person who lost it and then went against someone against their own race. It's just the whole thing was completely absurd. And there's a lot to go into about that. But it's just I think it really reflects like where the conversation is right now and how it absolutely desperately needs to change. Which is why I'm happy that you're starting this.
Yeah, it needs to be it needs to happen. I mean, when we see, it's either one extreme or the other when it comes to people in the Anglosphere. Either the progressive leftist white people who have no problem with Muslims, but see Islam as an illiberal ideology, and then you have the other extreme where it's just the Trump flag waving, neoconservative, pro-war, pro-Zionist, tattoo wearing, Islam hating, non-white hating, all just just mixed into a bowl, and it's either one extreme or the other. Us who've lived, who know that white people aren't just this extreme dichotomy, that there's all these different nuances to those, that are neither of those positions, that there are many people in the Anglosphere who are, they might just be politically neutral and not care about any of this stuff, or they may have opinions that are the solid. I mean, just a perfect example, I did a survey on Twitter with an account from the Freedom Convoy in Canada, and whatever your thoughts are on the Freedom Convoy, that's up to you. But I asked them, straight up, what are your thoughts on Islam? Right? Was it either positive, neutral, slightly negative, or highly negative? 20% said positive. So 1/5 of the Canadian convoy has people in the Freedom Convoys have positive attitudes towards Islam. 37% was neutral. So right there, 57% have either neutral or positive attitudes towards Islam. 14% said slightly negative, and then 29% said highly negative. So right there, you have a mixture of people and their thoughts on Islam. And I thought, when I saw that poll, I'm like, that's pretty accurate based on not just my family and their reactions to me converting to Islam and the conversations that I've had, but also, converts and their families, that I've met as well. That's not that bad given all the anti-Islam propaganda that was around us for so many decades. And on top of that, the fact that now the only Muslims you see are these liberal progressives, that just, take these like anti-white stances in the media. So, it's far more varied than that. And showing this to Muslims that I know were actually absolutely shocked when they saw this, because, they don't really interact with white people to the same extent that we do. So, I guess, what's the point of showing them that and trying to change their opinions on that? I mean, you could say, what's the point of even trying to change these Muslims that have these kind of attitudes about the Anglosphere? I think, but for us, it's important because at the end of the day, we have to mitigate these relationships with our family, and we can. you know, you can take these kind of extreme approaches, you know, to how people think about the Anglosphere, but you know, that is just not going to, you know, for us. I mean, at the end of the day, we still have to talk to these people, and you know, and a lot of them just don't even want to hear about Islam. You know, they just, you know, want to go about their day and, you know, just live their life. And the best way to give dawah to them is via our actions. And I think having this kind of like, you know, in the Anglosphere, I think there's kind of like this dichotomous attitude of what the Muslim community is like. Either they're extreme on the right or extreme on the left. You know, because that's the only two things that they see on in the media. You're either Anjem Chowdhury or Ash Sarkar, and there's nothing in between, right? And then for a lot of people in the Muslim community who don't really act with the Anglosphere, it's either one or the other. It's either you're, I don't know, Joe Biden, I guess, or you're Donald Trump, you know, and there's nothing in between. When in reality, there's far more nuance to that. So that's kind of just what I wanted to add there. But let's get to, you know, our second topic, which is challenging the dominant narrative of, I guess, the other detractors, you know, to Islam for Europeans. The first set of detractors we've already kind of discussed in detail, which is, you know, the liberal progressivist Muslims who, you know, kind of have this anti-Western, anti-white attitude. And the second group, I guess, what you call is like the monoculturalists. And this kind of voice was very popular, you know, when I converted to Islam, not just, you know, from many different Muslim groups, I guess the Salafis, Hizb ut-Tahrir, you know, you name it, you know, traditional imams, you know, who were, you know, born and raised in the Muslim world, you know, who learned traditional Islam, but were kind of oppressed by nationalist governments. So their take on it is the best way to have the Muslim Ummah be successful is quote unquote unity. And that means just downplaying any type of, you know, ethnicity or nationality altogether, you know. So on the one hand, you have people saying, you know, we're proud of our, you know, Palestinian nationality or Iraqi nationality, and, you know, like, and, you know, admitting that, you know, that there's, you know, we have, you know, clear traditions and cultures in Islam. And then the other extreme is the kind of the monocultural approach, which is let's just get rid of any cultural or national identity whatsoever. Let's get rid of the cultural masjid and just be one united monocultural group. I kind of refer to it as the Medina solution, where, you know, let's go back to 7th century Medina and apply how the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam united the hearts and minds of the Aus and the Khazraj, and they no longer identified with a tribal identity. And, you know, then after that, the Muslim community was successful. So I can understand the appeal of this approach, but trying to take that to, you know, the 2022 and apply it there, it just, what are some of the pitfalls of what, you know, this kind of mentality in 2022? Kris, do you want to spin off on this?
I just wanted to add something that I found interesting in my personal anecdotal experience is that most of the monocultural minded Muslims I've found are that I've spoken to personally are second generation Muslims that grew up here in the West. Whereas when I've spoken to more recent migrants, Muslims from other traditional cultures abroad, they seem to actually be more open to the idea. I guess because my theory is that the Western raised people kind of absorb this kind of radical individualism, whereas the people coming from abroad more recently maybe have more of a communal, tribal view on life, and they understand that doing something collectively or being specific in dawah to a certain community, they understand that more, perhaps. That's just something I'd like to add.
Anything to add to that, Abdullah?
I mean, not really. When it comes to like the whole formation of communities as well, I'm generally of the position that when it comes to like the mosques, I think those are the ones that should keep monocultural, like, because, you know, the reality of Muslim life is that it's not just the mosque, it's, you know, it's the mosque and then everything that's around it. And, you know, another thing I was gonna mention earlier was like, you know, when you look at things historically, like say those, let's say when you accepted Islam a really long time ago, saying like, I don't know, 12th century, 13th century, basically in the time before World War II, when, you know, in the Islamic civilization was still a formidable basically, community and society to be looked at, was that there was a whole, societal structure and, institutions and administrations that you can easily assimilate a convert into. So, they could just use, someone who knows about Islam, who has been lived near them, or to take a more extreme example, had their land conquered by them, by one means or the other. All of a sudden there were a lot, it was very easy to go into that community and be like, I believe, I accept Islam. And then there's all of these different avenues for you to take, whether it be your job, whether it be, you can now marry a Muslim woman, for example. So, there was all of these different ties that sort of held in place, and that, that made the assimilation process so much easier. Whereas today, where obviously Western civilization is dominant, the reason why, you can be like, oh, I'm a proud Palestinian, I'm a proud Egyptian, but you can't be like, I'm a proud white Muslim, is because, well, it's the simple answer that, Western civilization is currently the dominant one. So, there's this extreme apprehension, to be like, oh, I'm, proud of my history and my culture, even though you don't mean anything negative about that. You just, it's just your identity, and you're not at all, hating of any other culture whatsoever. But yeah, but and this is exactly the reason why leftist institutions reel people in so easily. It's because if you're growing up here in a very blue state in the United States, and even if you are a Muslim and you don't want to be associated with the morals and the values of these institutions, it's so easy for them to really win, because there's so many different positions and jobs and educational avenues which basically reward you heavily and reinforce you if you do adhere by them.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think when a lot of Muslims say, I'm talking about the ones who have high positions in Islamic leadership, or they kind of are like they're they're kind of dawas, the well-known da'is, within the internet, the the extreme right will come against Islam and say, well, multiculturalism is a failure, and they'll kind of conflate multiculturalism with Islam itself. And I think the mistake comes in is when these da'is, they'll sort of say, whoa, well, that's not, well, with Islam, for 1400 years, Islam was a multicultural society. We had so many different cultures flourishing within Islam. But I think that's far different than what we have today in the West in 2022. I mean, the Muslim world back then, yes, you had many different, people from different walks of life that embraced Islam en masse. But for the most part, they kind of, I mean, Chinese Muslims lived in China. Muslims in the Ottoman Empire, they lived in the Ottoman Empire. They live in what is present day Turkey. Arab Muslims lived in the Arab world. And people did move back and forth. Muslims did, migrate from city to city, but it wasn't as prevalent as it is today. I mean, and back then, migration, it was on foot or it was by animal. And then when you moved to another city, you assimilated into that culture. So at most, when you converted to Islam, you already lived around many Muslims in that area. So you already had like this kind of, agreed upon set of cultural norms, some of which were Islamic, some of which were just particular to that particular culture, right? So to say what happened back then is exactly what's happening now in the West in 2022 is a gross oversimplification. I mean, now and I'm not saying that to be, to say that to agree with, the extreme right anti-Islam narrative that, Muslims are just, they're just invaders and they're raping people and, they're, committing abuses, which is a very small segment of non-practicing Muslims that are doing that in Europe. But let's take, for example, a city like Toronto. You have so many different sub-communities that came from different parts of the world that, flew to Toronto and stayed there and formed their own kind of cultural enclaves and their own masjids. And to think that like you can take a convert from a Western background, and they're somehow going to seamlessly accept all these new different cultural norms and just fit in, like a Tetris piece, is just a gross oversimplification. And I think by saying that the Muslim world was like this wonderful multicultural society, and trying to pitch that as, Islam can fix all these problems the way that we're pitching it now, to Western ears, it doesn't fit. To them, it's just like, how is that possible? How is a Western convert going to go to Medina Masjid and on the Danforth, which is basically 95% South Asian, and somehow, the South Asian Muslim community is going to fix all the problems of this Western convert, who probably hasn't told his family that he converted. And if he told his family, they would completely flip, and they would, they would get fired from their job, or, disowned from their family, or written out of the will. It just doesn't compute. And I think a lot of these, when you tell a lot of these Muslim leaders, that, this isn't going to work, their reaction is very negative to that. They say, "What are you talking about?" I mean, any criticism of the Muslim convert programs that they have is going to be met with extreme derision. So this is the narrative that we're trying to challenge. So how do we go across to the Muslim community as a whole and say, look, this is what we need to do. There are some things that the Muslim community has been doing that's been very well. I mean, the soup kitchens, keep all those. The convert packages, you can keep all of those. But I think trying to say, look, I mean, there are some things that the Muslim community just isn't equipped to handle, and we need to kind of do our own thing. So how do we challenge that narrative? Kris, do you have any thoughts on that?
So I have a few ideas about that, but firstly, I'd say that an interesting task of white Muslims currently is to build our own infrastructure. So coming from a very atomized individualistic society, often we have to rely on the social infrastructure of other communities. And that's well-intentioned on their part, because they have more of a social infrastructure that can help people with, marriage and friendship and whatnot. But we have to start ours from scratch. We don't have buildings, we don't have institutions, we don't have large associations. So we're at a very kind of like a basic, almost primitive level of like starting a new community. So I kind of have a three-part model as to what I think can propel us forward. And if you guys will bear with me while I break it down. I think the first step would be kind of like similar to like what if Islam for Europeans is doing now, where you have different crews or groups or small bands of brothers that are from the shared background. So in this case, the white Muslims. So you have, like, for example, in Ontario, our group, Robert, like we have a small crew in the Ontario area. And so if that spreads to other provinces or other areas, maybe even places like the States or whatever, just basically spread out little crews, little bands of mostly male, realistically, white Muslim groups. I would say that's the first stage. So getting to know each other on a basis of friendship, camaraderie, getting to know each other's families, having informal get-togethers where we do wholesome activities together collectively. And once that is established, the kind of organizational or sodality type stage, then the familial or kinship stage can come after that. So once groups of associations are present, then we can start talking about intermarriage. Then we can start talking about, the members of the individuals having large families, large extended families, which develops into, I'd say, a few extended large families would coalesce into a type of like clan type structure, which is consistent with our Indo-European heritage. And those clans coalesce into larger, you could say, tribal units. And those coalesce into a full-blown nation, a sizable demographic of people. So right now we're at the very beginning, in my opinion, the very beginning stage of simply guys getting together as friends, not blood related, but coming together as associations, or what I guess you could call in anthropology sodalities, a non-kinship based association. And that's what I4E is. It's in the nascent stage of an association. Once we build more of those, you could say chapters or branches, and we coalesce together, then we can start talking about the familial blood relations. So a member of one crew marries his children to the children of another crew, and you have ties of kinship. And it becomes more real and concrete. Realistically, all along this entire process, there will be critics and there will be people accusing us of some type of, ideology or racial this or ethno that, but it's really biological. It's not really political. It's largely apolitical. It's a very personal and biological process, in my opinion. Even before the familial blood relations, it's a very organic biological process. We don't have time or the luxury to argue about really political stances or ideologies. We simply need to get together and coordinate common activities together, meet each other's parents, give gifts to each other's families, talk to each other's families, come together for barbecues or hikes or hunts or whatever it may be. So once this starts going and once this process is rolling, regardless of people's criticisms, it's a snowball effect. Then our kinsmen or our fellow countrymen see that these look like some pretty like wholesome people, and they want to hang out and they want to ask. Most of the guys I talk to, most of the Canadian guys, a lot of them from rural places, a lot of like truckers and people just from kind of rural Ontario. A lot of them have no idea about Islam. They have no idea. And when I've broken it down to them that under Islam, we can have, once again, our extended family and clan structures and communal structure that we've lost in Western liberalism. And these guys are very receptive to that idea. And part of it is because I can communicate to them on their level. I'm from them. If you get someone from another community explaining that to them, they may not be as receptive. That's just the reality. But that kind of three-stage model, I guess you could say sodality, extended family / clans, and then finally a full-blown, recognizable, identifiable nation. I think those are the necessary steps we have to take. And we have to initiate it ourselves because no one else can help with that. They can help in terms of maybe agreeing to host some event or joining with us in some common, an Eid event or something. But largely this is the initiative of us, finding brothers, seeking them out, literally seeking them out from like masajid or whatever gathering, networking with them, establishing the local units or crew, coordinate between those crews. If we're in the same country, then we all come together occasionally. That's kind of the what I have in mind. But I may have gone wildly off topic, but I thought I would just lay that out, break that down for the show.
No, that's wonderful. I mean, I agree with everything you stated, Kris. To add to that, and again, for those who haven't really or hearing this for the first time, it may sound very radical, but to be clear, and Kris would agree with me as is, that we have absolutely no problem. In fact, we encourage converts from other backgrounds to do the exact same thing. There are, if we take a look at First Nations in Canada, for example, I mean, they need to, take this initiative on themselves because they know their community is the best, and they have, this instant connection with other people from First Nation background, even if they're from other tribes. And we have no problem with them, no problem working with them in tandem while they work on their own, their own groups as well. We can meet for Eid prayer and stuff like that. I mean, it kind of reminds me of, how the Hells Angels, that's a bad example, but the Hells Angels, they had, they said they were an all-white, basically, motor group, and the East Bay Dragons was an all-black motorcycle group, but they still had good relations with one another. They would actually get together and party, once a year. And the leader of the Hells Angels knew very well the leader of the East Bay Dragons. So they had this common connection with the motorcycle culture, and that's just motorcycling. I mean, that's kind of like a brotherhood based on a particular culture. But this is Islam, so and that's why we're not a supremacist group. We don't advocate any type of hatred or ill will towards any Muslim from any background. You know, we feel that this is actually the best thing for the Muslim community. So this is not a zero-sum game. This is going to pay dividends for the hijabi Pakistani sister walking down the street. This is going to pay dividends for the Somali brother, wearing traditional clothing at the clinic. This is going to pay dividends for the Muslim family traveling through rural Ontario, because they're going to we want the anglosphere to see that Islam is for everybody. Abdullah, do you have any points to add to what Kris and me said?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, listening to what Kris said, I don't particularly disagree with anything he said, but any normie Muslim would listen to what he said, and if they're not, if they've been leaning a little too, to like mainstream narratives, and that's pretty much what they've been absorbing, they'll listen to what Kris is saying and think, oh, what about, you alienating yourself and your group, if let's say, white Muslim Europeans, let's say, away from the larger Muslim community, and that, they'd accuse them of saying, oh, you're basically taking apart, your own group and, separating yourselves, which I don't really see it like that. Because, like you're saying, it's not an issue of separation. It's an issue of rebuilding the familial connections that you lost when you converted to Islam in the first place. You lost a lot when if you're a white convert and you accept Islam, so you need to, like exactly like Kris said, you need to start from scratch. And I love how he brought up infrastructure, because, well, first of all, for you guys who don't know, you guys should all read Mehdi Locke's book. He's a translator of a lot of the great scholars' books of, Islam, different schools of thought. He has a book, I have it right here with me. It's called The Big Step: How to Survive Islam in the Anglosphere. And it starts off, specifically to converts, not just white converts, converts of any race. So I really think you guys should pick this up, look it up, just The Big Step, Mehdi Locke. And I'm actually interviewing him now for my Substack. And one of the things we went over actually was infrastructure. I asked them, and I have it written right here. What will it take for Anglosphere Muslims to truly break free from enslavement to mainstream narratives? Are most who grew up here destined to be assimilated into riding the waves of whatever the next big thing is? I won't give away his full answer, but basically one of the big things he mentions was infrastructure. Because the big thing that's happening right now is you have a lot of these white Muslims who they left their main order and joined Islam because they were sick and tired of the neoliberal secular order of things that were going around, and then they joined, let's say, the Muslim community, and if the Muslim community is too being brought up into the leftist narrative, then basically it's like I escaped the neoliberal secular order only to join a community that's seeking enfranchisement and representation in that same order. So it's like they feel like they have come full circle from the one thing that they've been trying to escape this whole time. You know what I'm saying? So
True.
Also, and this is what he suggests, basically in infrastructure, you need, basically build parallel, markets, schools, hospitals, clinics, universities, and he puts in brackets, not liberal arts colleges, and they need to base it on awqaf, and that's a whole, different subject on its own. But I totally agree with him there. Like we need those kinds of infrastructures to really start and rebuild those relationships that a lot of us have lost. And, for those of you guys who accepted Islam and had those connections broke off.
Yeah. The and this is what the cycle that I see is that mosques, they want to help out converts. They're very sincere. They're just like, oh man, these they converted to Islam. Let's roll out the red carpet for them. Let's give them the convert package. Let's turn them into an alim. Let's get them married to a born Muslim. Let's help them with this assimilation process, right? So they'll spend innumerable amount of resources trying to acclimate these new converts. Now, when you look at the United States, for example, the African American community, they were the flag bearers of Islam from the very beginning. I mean, their ancestors were brought over as slaves who were Muslim. They lost their Islamic identity, and in the 20th century, they had this enormous struggle to bring it back. So they built these institutions, even though at the beginning it was the Nation of Islam, but then they transitioned into Sunni Islam, a lot of them. So when Black people converted to Islam in the 1990s and the 2000s, there was already an existent Black Muslim subcommunity and Black Muslim identity, and they had their own African American masjids. So they were far less likely among these immigrant masjids to need these resources. Where for the white converts, the immigrant masjids were catered, I guess, to the white convert to Islam. So, the white converts, they were, brought up as like these, like saviors of the community, that they were going to, spread Islam in the anglosphere and convert their whole community, which they weren't ready for. And the African American community, and rightly so, accused these immigrant masters of white supremacy, because they're just trying to, you know, build up these white converts, whereas like the black converts didn't really use these resources. So, and then the vicious cycle continues. So on the one hand, you have these, the people with the monocultural Medina solution, these Muslim leaders who are like, we need to erase lines. We need to, be one united ummah and just get rid of any identity other than Islam. When in actuality, when you try to implement that, what happens is that only the white converts overwhelmingly are going to use these resources. They're going to take the camping trips. They're going to take the trips to Mecca. And, the Muslim community, the mosque is going to drain all the resources. And then they're not addressing the main issue, which is the relationship with their family. And then it all falls apart. And then months, years down the road, these white converts end up exiting the Muslim community or Islam altogether. And then the cycle just repeats itself over and over and over again. It's just so frustrating. So when you explain it to people like this, our concepts, it's going to catch on like wildfire, I think. It's just that it's going to take, for me, for the longest time, I held the same beliefs as, the monoculturalists, and to an extent the leftists. I was just like them. It took me many, many years to realize that this, kind of approach is simply not working. So this is great conversation, guys. Let's do a part 3. I don't know, what's your timeline like? Can you hang around for a couple more minutes, or maybe like another 20 minutes or so?
I absolutely can.
Great. Kris? All right, cool. So I'm going to stop right here at part 2. Please subscribe to Islam for Europeans. I am talking with brother Kris from the Big Smoke, Toronto, and brother Abdullah from the Empire State in New York. Subscribe to Islam for Europeans. I'm your host, Robert. Assalamu alaikum. And please catch us for part 3.